are in Windows, which probably the majority of you guys are using Windows anyhow. So my Windows machine's out in my car, but the experience is very similar in Visual Studio for Mac as it is for Visual Studio for Windows. The process of actually creating a new micro framework application is very simple. Once you've installed the SDK, you can go in and you can choose, I think it's in Other, and miscellaneous, yeah, so Other, miscellaneous, micro framework, console application. And that is the application that you actually deploy to your Netduino. And deployment is very easy. With your Netduino's plugged in to the USB, then it shows up here. You get a drop down that would show your Netduino, and you just select that, and then you hit play, and that compiles the application, and it compiles it to IL, and then we've got some magic to take that IL and compact it into the IL that the .NET micro framework understands, which is a little bit different than traditional .NET, and we deploy it over what's called MFUSB. But it's very easy. It's one-click deploy, hit the big button. Choose your Netduino, hit the play button, and then it's there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So your SDK translates somehow original IL to the IL?
Yes, that's right. So the question is that our development tools translate IL to the Netduino IL. Yes. So the way that the micro framework works is that the micro framework has a tiny OS that runs on the Cortex-M microcontroller. And it runs a flavor of .NET called .NET Micro Framework. And the .NET Micro Framework is a little bit it's a little bit limited compared to standard .NET. One of the limitations that you don't have, for example, is generics, which is an unfortunate thing that we're actually working on our next version of our product. We want to support a much more. We actually want to support full .NET standard. But the packages that run on Netduino go through a metadata processor engine, which actually pulls out a lot of the cruft of a standard IL package, and also changes some things up to run on the microcontroller, and also adds the tiny CLR OS, which Microsoft built to run .NET Micro Framework applications. And so that gets packaged up and then uploaded to the device, and then the application runs. And the Netduino or .NET Micro Framework runtime model is such that you deploy one application. It's the operating system and a single application, and so it's really, you think of it as a controller. And so in this case, we have an appliance controller application, but you don't run multiple applications at once. It's one application that does everything that you need. Yeah, back here.
Sounds like it's fast enough, still fast enough to do real-time applications.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question is it fast enough to do real-time applications? Yeah, absolutely. It's very fast. We have customers doing all kinds of interesting industrial automation controls and stuff, in which they're doing real-time sensor input and feedback to control robots and all kinds of different interesting processes. It's also fast enough to do MIDI control work with effectively, no discernible latency. There's on the board itself, we talked about PWM, the pulse width modulation. So there's built-in hardware pulse width modulation generators. So the chip is actually generating that modulation, but you can actually run software PWM, which is you can cycle the I/O output or the digital output so that you can do PWM on your own in software, and it's very fast, very powerful. So you can do very high frequency PWM even. So it's very powerful. Power is definitely not an issue. No, right here.
Yeah, so you have your own software running on Netduino, right? Like, do you have any libraries that you're writing for discovery? Because you mentioned that I need to add an IP address, right?
Yeah.
But if you have the full stack, do you have anything where it will help in discovery of all the?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the question was about the web server and discovery. Right now, the sample application, the Xamarin application, you have to enter an IP address. So one of the things that we're actually adding, we've been working on with Maple Server, is adding UDP broadcast. And so if you have a bunch of these things all around your house, you can open up your app, and then it would discover via UDP all of these running Maple servers, and so it would be you just select from the list. So that's something that we're working on adding right now, as a matter of fact. Good question. Good idea. Yeah.
I have another question.
Absolutely.
So I teach my daughter's robotics class.
Yeah.
And for app development, right now we are exploring MIT App Inventor. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or not.
Yeah.
That helps a lot in writing code where they don't need to worry about syntax. They can just drag, drop, block.
Yeah, that's
Do you
right.
have any plans for that for hobbyists where I can focus on the semantics rather than on the code?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the question was, when you're writing an app, or you guys have any plans to do more of like a blocks architecture so that it's easier to sort of drag and drop visually? And MIT has released the App Inventor, which does that for Arduino and stuff. Absolutely, it's definitely on the plans. Netduino Foundation is actually the sort of genesis of that, and the next iteration of that, the idea is to add that blocks and scopes architecture to it, so that you can simply just wire them up and make it a lot easier.
Yeah, I was wondering, what's the relationship between Netduino and Microsoft's .NET Core?
Yeah, so the question is what is the relationship from Netduino and .NET Core? There's no relationship.
Okay.
We're working on it. Our vNext is going to be, it will run .NET Core, is the idea, but Netduino runs .NET Microframework.
Okay, and that's basically just based on the published C# standards?
Yeah, so .NET Microframework is actually built by Microsoft
Oh, it is.
and published by Microsoft.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's
So
official.
you get packages from them in terms of, I was wondering about updating, security updates and that type of stuff.
Yeah, so the .NET Microframework has been published by Microsoft, and then now it's It's a community updated and supported thing. So we're moving it forward. GHI is moving it forward. There's a number of initiatives to keep it moving forward.
I first of all apologize. I missed almost your entire presentation. So you've already answered these questions in your presentation.
No worries.
Similarities between Netduino and Arduino.
Yeah.
And do you have or have you got plans to be able to port your Netduino code to an Arduino device? For example, let's say I need to use something that's low power and I want to have it do all the cool stuff. I love C# and I love all the API, but I need it to work on Arduino. That's really tiny.
Yeah, so good question. There was two parts. First part is how does Netduino compare to Arduino? And then two, can you port Netduino code to Arduino? So first part of that is that Netduino is form compatible with Arduino. So there's a lot of what they call shields, which are things that the peripherals that just sit, they plug in on top. And so Netduino is designed to support those out of the box. Driver support for them is at varying levels. With Netduino Foundation, we're adding a lot of those, it's getting bigger all the time. The other question was, I want to run Netduino code to Arduino. Is there a porting path? And the answer is the simple answer is that there isn't. Netduino is in a class all by itself. Netduino is very low power, just like Arduino in the sense of power consumption, but it's much more powerful. You can build much more sophisticated applications that just simply can't run on Arduino.
that because of the hardware that's built into it?
It is largely because of the hardware, yeah. Most of the Arduino models, there are some up-level Arduino models with more power microprocessors, but most of the Arduino models are very limited, very not, in terms of computing power, very low. And so what you can do with Netduino is it's really, like I said, it's a different class. It's Arduino is a great like hobby and fun platform, but you can actually take Netduino applications and you can deploy .NET Micro Framework applications and products that are much more sophisticated. Yeah. Back
Is
here.
there a security benefit or maybe some other consequence of using a micro framework versus running code on bare metal?
So the question is there a security benefit using micro framework as opposed to like running low-level code? So yes and no. Yes, in the sense that with the .NET Micro Framework, you get a lot of the things that come with the .NET Framework in terms of security, in terms of like your application is generally much more stable because it's managed and has a garbage collector and things like that. And that's actually a real concern on these small embedded devices. But ultimately, if you are looking for, if you do write code, if you are concerned with security and absolute bare performance, then what we recommend is that you prototype your applications with Netduino, and then you can port to lower level languages if you want to control sort of all aspects of that. And actually, that's with our sort of next generation thing that we're working with, that will become a non-issue as well, because our next generation is a much more powerful, full operating system, full .NET platform. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm asking questions.
I should get over to this side of the room because I keep seeing hands, but completely ignored. Yeah.
Is Netduino production suitable?
Yeah. So the question is Netduino production suitable? I think it. I think that varies on your use case. I can tell you that there are a lot of Netduinos that have been running for years in production capacities and in various uses. I am hearing all the time from folks now that are reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, we've been using Netduino for this industrial control process, and they've been using it for years without issue." So I would say yes, in the sense that a lot of people are doing it and seem to have no issue. On the other hand, I'm not sure I would put it in the space shuttle. Maybe RV next, as we work out kinks there. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question. And there was another hand up over here. Oh, yep.
How does the Netduino platform compare to the Raspberry Pi?
Good question. So how does the Netduino platform compare to Raspberry Pi? Great question. They're similar but sort of different use cases. Raspberry Pi you can think of as a small Linux computer. It's very power hungry, and like a computer, it has a lot of the standard computer I/O, but it doesn't have built-in analog I/O, and it's lacking some of the other digital protocol support. So it's kind of like Raspberry Pi is basically taking a Linux computer and miniaturizing it, but it's still just a Linux computer. It doesn't have a built-in analog to digital controller, so you can't integrate with analog sensors out of the box. You have to get expansion boards and things like that. So Raspberry Pi isn't really the same. It's a great board, by the way. I'm not dogging on Raspberry Pi, but it's a different. It sort of solves a different use case. It's not really meant for real hardware hacking. Yeah, here.
Does your Maple server have any kind of means of securing the connection? For instance, if I know your IP address, do you want me turning your coffee pot on and off?
It doesn't right now, no,
Okay.
but you could add it really easily. We just haven't added it. I mean, I think that you could probably do some general authentication in there. You could write a method for authentication pretty easily. In our example, we don't have to do that. But yeah, you could do very simple authentication in just a few lines of
Do you
code.
have any libraries that do like certificates so that you could just validate a certificate? As an example, a client certificate, you send that across in a post
So
and say, do I agree with this?
yeah, so the question is, do we have any libraries to validate certificates? I do believe that there are some built into the .NET micro framework. I haven't used them personally, but I know that some of that stuff does.
That would be one way to
Yeah.
roll you around. Okay,
No.
thanks.
Do you support SSL?
Yes, yeah, SSL supported. Awesome. Any other questions? Yeah, sir, back there
I
again.
have a use case for something that I'm actually planning on doing.
Yeah,
Let's say I'm an oil company,
yeah,
and I pay for the UK. But my oil is leaving in the ocean of Australia.
yeah,
And I have sensors attached to the Netduino board,
yeah,
and they're collecting data. The data that is collected, I want it to send over the internet to be monitored live.
yeah.
One
Yeah, so the scenario there is geographically disparate sensor systems and control systems or monitoring systems. Is that possible in Netduino? It absolutely is, and folks are doing that today. In that case, you would have a Netduino would be uploading data, connecting to a web server, and uploading sensor readings and potentially pulling that for control signals, etc. And then you would have, you could access that, of course, you could access that data anywhere in the world. So you could update that to Azure and then view that in Azure in London or anywhere you want. And most of that is not Netduino specific, but the Netduino is more than capable of communicating with web servers and uploading data and stuff. And like I said, we have customers that are doing that right now. Yeah.
Can you include library packages, like NuGet packages that aren't necessarily too close to the edge, like just like utility packages? For example, Newtonsoft?
Yeah, so question is there NuGet packages for Netduino? Yeah, actually, Newtonsoft JSON serializer is, they have a build for the .NET Micro Framework. And I think we're actually using that in Maple server, if I recall. I think that's the library we're using.
But it depends on having builds that are built for the network.
That's right. Yeah, just like with PCLs and other platform specific code, you have to have the package has to be built for the .NET Micro Framework.
Okay.
But there's a lot of micro framework packages out there, for sure. I mean, you're not going to have the coverage that you would with full .NET, but there's still quite a bit of stuff.
The things that like utility stuff.
Yeah, there's a
I
lot.
wonder how hard it would be to convert, where you're not actually integrating, it's just coding helpers type of stuff.
Yeah, there's a ton of that. In fact, I was looking at a bunch the other night. There's a ton of utility code things for Netduino for .NET Micro Framework in general that are very specific to microcontroller programming.
So difference between Netduino and Raspberry Pi
Yeah.
and frameworks. So with Netduino using micro framework,
Yes.
and for Raspberry Pi I can build in one application with .NET Core
Yes, that's right.
engine, deploy that console app and run it.
Yes.
Basically use more of .NET and
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so the question is, what's the difference between the framework compatibility between Netduino and Raspberry Pi? And yes, that's true. Netduino runs the .NET Micro Framework, which is a limited subset. And with the Raspberry Pi, you can run the full .NET.
how much more can I easily connect to NET server?
So how much?
Oh,
I mean, that's a hard question to answer in terms of how much limited. There are some limits to it, but in practical usage, I think there's very little that either a Raspberry Pi can do that a Netduino cannot in terms of what you can accomplish.
And Raspberry Pi doesn't have the web server.
That's right. Well, there's a number of other web servers that you could run on it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, but Raspberry Pi is, like I said, it's you know, it's a little Linux box, so it's got all the computer stuff, but it's missing a lot of the hardware type frameworks and whatnot. Yeah.
So you said in the future versions you're thinking about moving to full.NET on Netduino?
Yeah, that's right.
You
Yeah.
worried about performance issues with going from the smaller framework to the larger framework?
So we're, without giving too much away, no, we're not worried about the
Close
performance.
partnership.
What's that?
Close partnership.
Yeah. We're running mono, and we're doing some magic. It requires slightly different hardware because .NET has different RAM requirements, but it's beautiful.
So you guys publicly traded?
What's that? Publicly, yeah, IPO. No, we're so early. We're not even funded yet. we are bootstrapped, very bootstrapped.
What are advantages of being in the wilderness as opposed to major city?
Oh, for Wilderness Labs. It's funny. I mean, I enjoy the wilderness personally. It's funny that you asked that. So Wilderness Labs there's 3 co-founders. One is in Los Angeles, one is